Come out, wherever you are!
Field of Spence. That summer, I was 9 years old and my younger brother Dennis was nearly 7. Our family had a custom of going camping in the Great Smoky Mountains every Father's Day weekend. Dennis, Dad, Grandpa, and I were always in the same group, driving into the misty blue ridges that seemed like an other world after packing up the old station wagon in Knoxville before dawn. Another family joined us that year. My parents' friends who have 2 boys our age. After a lengthy journey, we arrived at Spence Field, a large meadow surrounded by dense forest. The sun shimmered over the grass and a gentle breeze carried the aroma of pine and earth. After erecting our tents and preparing lunch over the campfire, we spent the day exploring the pathways that led out into the trees. By mid-afternoon, Dennis and I began whispering to the other boys about playing hide-and-seek while the adults sat by the root conversing. Dennis said, "Come on, let's do it," with bright eyes. Mom demanded that he wear his red shirt and green pants for the trip so that he would be easily recognized. Tim, one of the other lads, muttered, "Yeah, let's hide and jump out at the dad's." Alex, his brother, smiled. "But don't go too far or we'll get in trouble." We held off until the adults were sidetracked before sneaking off in the direction of the clearing's edge. "You boys stay close," Dad yelled, half smiling as he saw us. We hid behind the woods while laughing. Dennis pulled at my sleeve. "Doug, where should I hide?" I indicated a dense area of brush a short distance downward. "We'll all go into hiding and then return here." His sneakers crunched in the dry leaves as he nodded and took off. I hid behind a tree trunk while the others dispersed as well. When Tim said, "Now," in a whisper after a minute, we all jumped up and ran toward the adults while yelling at the top of our lungs. Dad ruffled my hair while they laughed and leaped. "Good one, boys." I then took a look around. "Hey, where's Dennis?" Tim gave a shrug. "He was right over there." Alex gestured to the bush. "Perhaps he's still in hiding." "Dennis, come on, buddy," Dad yelled, scowling a little. "The game is over." No response. We called his name once more and began to giggle nervously. I shoved back the bush's branches where he had concealed himself. My gut nodded as I murmured, "He must have gone deeper in." Grandpa called out, "Dennis," across the trees. "This isn't funny." We dispersed, looking behind rocks and logs. 10 minutes went by, followed by 20. Dad's voice became strained and sharper. I shouted as I rushed ahead, my voice echoing off the woods, "Dennis!" Though the sound was muffled by the woods, suddenly everything seemed motionless, as though even the birds were paying attention. Thinking he might have looped around, we rushed back to the tents, but he was nowhere to be found. Only the men were with us on that vacation. Mom wasn't. And I recall wanting more than ever that she was. While the rest of us waited, Dad rushed down the trail, inspecting the switchbacks. He was breathing heavily and had wide eyes when he returned. "Nothing," he muttered. Grandpa touched his shoulder. "We'd better call the Rangers." At that point, it had been roughly 30 minutes. The Rangers arrived, made notes, and asked questions. One of them knelt down at my level. "Tell me exactly what happened, son." I told him everything. The last time I saw Dennis, the game, and the hiding places. I also mentioned that he had on a red shirt, as if that could make all the difference. With a nod, they began setting up search teams. One said, "We'll find him," but I could tell that Dad wasn't entirely convinced based on the way he glanced at the ground. That evening, flashlights went like fireflies through the forest. I can still hear the sound of boots on the ground, radio static, and guys repeatedly calling my brother's name in a low murmur. A ranger froze at one point. He muttered, "Did you hear that?" We all came to a halt. Dim, distant. It sounded like a cry. "Could be an animal," someone whispered. However, it caused my heart to race. "Dennis!" I cried out into the darkness, my voice breaking. No response. More searchers showed up by daybreak. Helicopters, soldiers, and volunteers all swept the ridgelines. Yesterday, the forest had seemed so spacious and enjoyable, but today it seemed unending, shrouded in solitude and mist. Dad asked me the same question over and over. "Did Dennis mention anything before he went into hiding, Doug?" "Nothing at all." "No," I repeated. "Just a place to hide." A ranger once discovered tiny footsteps that led to a creek. One bare, one shoe print. My heart skipped a beat. I exclaimed, "That's him." But the prints disappeared at the edge of the water. I noticed my father's fear for the first time at that moment. A family trekking nearby later claimed to have heard a scream at the same moment Dennis vanished. They reported to a ranger that they had saw a man hurrying through the forest with something wrapped in red fabric. The man's clothing were ripped. He was filthy and he was unshaven. Dad said again, his voice shaking. Red cloth. Dennis had been wearing a red shirt. I was deeply affected by that particular detail. The forest suddenly seemed to be alive and observing. Dad started to think he had been abducted. Those footprints stopped at the creek, he remarked while gazing into the flames that evening. Whoever it was skilled at what he was doing. The sound of the fire crackling and the wind rustling the tent walls kept me awake. It sounded like footsteps everywhere. Dennis's giggle and the way he glanced back over his shoulder before sprinting to hide kept coming to mind. I ought to have accompanied him. I ought to have stayed beside him. The days turned into weeks. The volunteers departed after the rangers. We eventually left him behind and headed home. I would stare out the window for months. Every time a car slowed down close to our house, we almost expected to see him strolling up the driveway, grinning and proud of how effectively he had concealed himself despite the mud on his shoes. However, he never returned. Somewhere deep in the Smokies, bones were discovered years later. Nothing was ever shown to support the claims that they might be his. Dad never stopped looking in his own way. He would drive up there once or twice a year, write letters and call park authorities. He would stand at the meadow's edge and gaze at the line of trees. Sometimes I still have dreams about that day. My brother was taken by the Smokies or someone in them, as the red shirt disappeared into the green. The laughter subsided, and the woods held their breath. The fact that we lost him isn't the worst part. We just didn't know how. The worst part, we just didn't know how. Like so many other Mother's Day mornings in our family, that one started. The promise of a picnic in the country, warm grins after church, and the subtle scent of polished pews blending with Mom's perfume. At the age of 11, I was able to assist my younger sister Marjorie and fasten her own clothes. She was 4 years old, a jumble of red curls and freckles that never seemed to remain groomed. Her father used to refer to her as his little spark. Alan, my 7-year-old brother, sat in between us, humming a song from Sunday school while kicking his sneakers against the seat in the back seat. Mom turned to smile at us and said, "Settle down, Alan, gently." Her cream hat, which she only wore to church, was adorned with a small blue ribbon. As the road wound through the forest close to Bradford, Dad was behind the wheel, tapping the steering wheel to the beat of a hymn. The windows were slightly open to allow in the pinescent air, and sunlight flickered through the trees, vivid and lively. We met the Akerlands at a clearing by the road, a peaceful spot Dad loved for picnics with a piece of open grass scattered with wildflowers and a nearby stream. While his wife assisted Mom in spreading the checkered blanket, Mr. Akerland was already unpacking his fishing gear. I recall the rustle of paper wrapping, the sound of laughter, and the scent of ham sandwiches combined with the cool breath of the ground. Marjorie pulled on my sleeve. She chirped, "Daddy, let's get Mama some flowers." In my hand, her tiny hand felt cozy and small. I glanced at her excited face, then back at Dad, who was discussing the fish in the stream with Mr. Akerland. "Okay, but not too far," I replied. Where our patent leather shoes slipped slightly on the wet grass as we skipped in the direction of the treine. There the trees were soft and sufficiently open to let in long golden ribbons of sunlight. Spots of violets, a vivid purple against the green, covered the ground. With her locks dancing, Marjorie laughed as she picked them. "I'm going to make the biggest bunch ever," she said. That's when the game began. Half play, half pretend. "Let's play hide and seek with the trees," she replied. I dramatically covered my eyes with my palms as I closed them. 1, 2, 3. Her laugh sounded like wind chimes. She squealed and came running to give me a hug when I discovered her behind a boulder. From the blanket, Mom's voice drifted, "Girls, don't go too far." With their poles, Dad and Mr. Akerland set off for the creek. "Watch for snakes," over his shoulder, Dad called. Mom shaded her eyes and leaned back against the automobile. "I'll take a little nap. I'm feeling sleepy from the sun." Alan remained close to the meal, occupied with a cookie. One of those days that seems to go on forever. The day felt languid and still. Marjorie ran behind a stand of shrubs. "You can't find me this time," she teased. I looked up after counting to 10. Whether she was prepared or not, I found her smiling and easily crouched. I laughed. "You're too easy. It's your turn to count now." She put her small hands over her eyes. A few steps away, I ducked behind a rock. We both laughed till our sides ached when she discovered me. By then, we had amassed a lovely stack of violets. I responded, "Let's take them to Mama." But Marjorie shook her head and grinned a little. You leave. This time I'll hide really well. I paused. All right, but wait until I return before moving. Her locks bobbed as she nodded gravely. I ran over to the vehicle. I held out the flowers and said, Here, for Marjorie and me. Grinning, Mom ran her fingertips over them. They're very beautiful, my dear. Your sister is where? I said, She's hiding. I'll go fetch her. I called softly when I got back to the location. The game is over, Marjorie. No response. I looked over the rock. Empty. Nothing behind the bushes. Birds were chirping in the woods, but all of a sudden it seemed too silent. I called again, louder this time, Marjorie. Nothing yet. When Alan heard me, he bolted. What's the issue? I tried to seem composed as I said, I can't find her. Together, we looked behind trees and parted shrubs. My skin prickled in the silence. Dad and Mr. Akerlund stopped laughing when they saw my face after coming back from the stream. She was just here, I said, gasping for air. Dad's face became stern. Spread out, he commanded. Call her name, Mom yelled, her voice breaking. Come to Mama, Marjorie, Mrs. Akerlund called as she rushed to the road. Her name bounced off the trees and reverberated throughout the woodland. Then, close to the boulder, someone discovered her small bouquet of violets crushed. The stems were shattered. Something chilly settled in my gut. To notify the police, Dad drove into Kane. I recall the fragrance of the station. Ink, cigarettes, and coffee. Dad told the police that the little girl had red hair, freckles, and a red hat. She was unable to travel very far. The policeman gave a nod. We'll locate her. Do not be concerned. By nightfall, candles lit up the jungle. Men from neighboring towns arrived. Boots are crushing. Calling into the darkness are voices. Marjorie. Marjorie West. I sat next to my mother and watched her twist her hands in her lap as women brought meals. Soft, chilly rain started to fall. Up until midnight, the searchers persisted. They returned with bloodhounds at dawn. After sniffing her garment, the dog ran uphill in the direction of an ancient cabin. There was only dust and silence within. The road marked the end of the trail. A man reported seeing a dark Plymouth accelerate off that afternoon. My heart thudded uncomfortably at the thought. Days went by, followed by weeks. The forests were repeatedly combed. Fields were turned upside down, streams dragged, and wells were investigated. Flyers were displayed everywhere. 4-year-old Marjorie West is missing. Her smile and copper-colored locks were captured in the photo, but she never returned. The FBI arrived, made notes, and asked questions. Rumors circulate. She had fallen into a well, according to some. Some whispered about weird men on the way or bears. Dad wandered the woods with a lantern every night, scarcely getting any sleep. Mom waited for a call while sitting by the phone, but it never arrived. The years blended together. The posters turned yellow. The volunteers ceased to show up. We relocated, but not very far. Mom once added, her voice shaking, just in case she finds her way home. Alan ceased discussing her. A part of me remained in those woods, counting to 10 even though I tried to mature. Even after getting married and starting a family, I couldn't stop wondering. Was she taken by someone? Did she just stray too far and chase a butterfly into the trees? I swear I can still hear her laugh when I go to that woodland. Fading amid the pines, soft and swift. What may have happened isn't the scariest thing. We'll never find out, because the woods still have a mystery out there, and I continue to hear her voice in the breeze, there. And I continue to hear her voice in the breeze. It was October 2006, one of those chilly Oregons with a pine and stone scent. I had drove to Crater Lake National with my son Alex. Just the two of us spending a weekend at park. He was 8 years old, little for his age, and full of curiosity and restless energy. Recently, he had developed an obsession with rocks and minerals, gathering them as treasures and labeling them in vintage mason jars at home. I believed he would benefit from the vacation, allow him to roam freely, explore, and perhaps reduce the intensity that occasionally accompanied his autism. We came to a stop at a pullout close to Cleewood Cove, a serene overlook where a tangle of pines sprang high from the volcanic soil. Far below, the water glistened a deep, unattainable blue. That acrid smell of wet bark and far-off snow was borne by the wind. Dad, take a look. Yellow is awesome. Pointing up the slope, Alex yelled. Before I could say anything, he began to climb. The dark dirt flashed across his crimson sneakers. I chuckled to myself. Hey, buddy, calm down. We have the entire day. With a smile on his face, his freckles stood out against his light complexion. Is it possible for us to play hide and seek? Only one game, I paused. Late in the afternoon, Even though the sun was already starting to set on the treeine, he was incredibly excited, his body trembling and his eyes wide. "All right," I responded at last. "You hide, I'll count." With a short cheer, he ran uphill, scattering small stones behind him. With my voice resonating into the trees, I leaned against the car and began counting. 1, 2, 3. As he ascended higher, I could hear him laughing and branches breaking. The boom had subsided by the time I was 20. "I'll be here whether you're ready or not." The wind was the only sound in the calm woods. I began slowly looking behind At the bottom of the slope are fallen logs and boulders. I yelled out, "Alex," no response. I smiled slightly, believing he was attempting to outwit me. He was skilled at it. "You made a wise choice, don't you? I'll locate you, though." My boots slipped on the loose cinder as I ascended higher. The trees became denser, their roots coiling across the earth like cables. I yelled, "This is fun, but we have to leave shortly." Nothing yet. My smile had vanished by the time I got to the top. I looked up at the clearing. A few rocky outcrops and a few sporadic pines. Too much silence pervaded the air. I made another louder call. "Alex, the game is over!" The echo was the only one to respond. I started searching diligently, looking behind stumps, beneath logs, and through brush. "Come on, buddy. You prevail. Let's head out." 5 minutes went by, 10. My heart started pounding. He had previously concealed himself, not emerging until he was certain the game was ended. However, this felt different. The hill descended sharply toward the lake, and the woods extended in all directions. My voice cracked as I called once more. "Please respond to me immediately, Alex." Nothing. With my lungs burning, I scanned the treeine as I jogged back down toward the car. The automobile door remained locked. No indication that he had come back. I struggled to find my phone. Just a bar of signal. Despite my pacing, I attempted to contact. Come on, come on. At last, the call lasted long enough for me to get through to Park Dispatch. "My son's missing," I uttered in a trembling voice. "We had a game of hide and seek. He didn't return after running up the hill." Within, 2 rangers showed up, composed and professional, attempting to hide the urgency I could already sense building like a tide. One questioned, "How long has he been missing?" 40 minutes, I said. "He's dressed in red sneakers, cargo pants, and a blue coat." With their radios buzzing, they nodded and began scanning the slope. Soon more showed up. As the sun blew out below the mountains, search dogs, volunteers, and flashlights sliced through the forest. His tiny footprints were imprinted into the volcanic dirt, and we followed them upward. Then they came to a sudden stop where the ground became rough. One ranger said, "He went this way," while pointing a light in front of them. The ray vanished into the shadows. I kept calling his name till my throat became sore. It was a hard night. The jungle seemed chilly and strange as the temperature quickly fell. Helicopters swept the peaks with their spotlights as they circled overhead. I recall briefly sitting on a rock, muttering to myself while my breath fogged. He was not going to get very far. He is more knowledgeable, but in my heart I was no longer certain. Hundreds of searchers, rangers, deputies, and volunteers with dogs and heat sensors arrived the following morning. The lead ranger spread out a map and stated, "We'll grid the area." I nodded numbly as I stood next to him. I didn't get much sleep. All I wanted was to relocate. We scoured kilometers of terrain, over fields of jagged rock, through dense pine, over slopes and down gullies. Voices reverberated throughout the park as people called his name from all directions. "This is Dad, Alex. Come on out." Nothing. Near a drainage that led to the lake, a dog detected a weak smell track that curved westward, but it disappeared where the rocks started. The handler muttered. Could mean he changed direction. That afternoon, the rain began to wash away the little tracks. We had departed. Later that day, my ex-wife showed up. She gave me the impression that I was a stranger. She muttered, "How could he just vanish?" "I don't know," I replied. We were playing. The searchers started exchanging rumors. A hiker who had earlier noticed a lone man strolling the road. No one recognized the parked car. Cougar footprints were indicated as being close by. Every theory struck like a blow to the chest. I thought he was injured somewhere or worse. Days went by. I was asked questions by reporters that I was unable to respond to. One asked, "Tell us about your son," and held up a microphone. I looked past her in the direction of the ridgeline. "He's smart," I said. "He enjoys going into hiding. If anyone knows anything, please let me know." Snow started to fall around the 5th day. Flakes of thin material floating through the trees. At night, ground search will have to be halted. It's getting dangerous, a ranger informed me. I pleaded with them to continue. He's out there. I sense it. However, the formal search came to an end before the end of the week. Volunteers left for their homes. The rangers prepared their equipment. I remained. I called his name into the breeze as I strolled the same paths by myself for weeks. Every year I went back to inspect the same valleys and ridges. Nothing ever showed up. Not his shoes, not his jacket, not a piece of clothes. Even now there are nights when I dream I hear his voice, but it's weak and far away. When I wake up and hear the silence, I half expect to hear him chuckle. Instead, I see him emerge from behind a tree and declare that he has won the game. However, the woodland preserves its secrets, and my son is still hiding, waiting for me to locate him somewhere in those huge quiet woods above Crater Lake. We would create forts out of fallen logs, climb the ancient oak, and challenge one another to explore the furthest edge of the woods, where the light dimmed early and the air always felt a little cooler, until nightfall every afternoon after school. "Let's play hide-and-seek out here," Jack remarked one Saturday with a playful twinkle in his eyes. "The woods are enormous. Nobody will be discovered. Over many hours." It sounded like an adventure, so we all chuckled. I volunteered to be it. Lisa smiled first. "Count to 50 while keeping your eyes closed. Don't peek." I covered my eyes with both hands as I leaned against the rough bark of a large tree. 1, 2, 3. As they faded into the distance, their shoes and laughter crunched over dried leaves. Everything had stopped by the time I was 50, with the exception of the wind rustling the branches. "Are you ready or not?" I arrive. I began cautiously, looking at the areas where sunshine was peeking through the canopy. The scent of dirt and pine sap filled the forest, and I was surrounded by a dense silence. I looked between low bushes and fallen logs until I saw Tom standing behind a pile of boulders, his shoulders trembling as he tried not to laugh. "Got you," he moaned as he brushed off his clothes and joined me. "Let's find the others." Emily always hides high, most likely in a tree. Together we looked, occasionally yelling. I glimpsed Lisa's pink sweater behind a trunk, and when we tagged her, she let out a squeal. She grinned and said, half irritated, "You two are too good." But Jack wasn't there. The air was wet and chilly as we traveled farther down where the terrain sloped toward a brook. There was no longer any laughter, only the sound of a crow cawing somewhere overhead and a far-off drip of water. "Jack!" My voice could hardly be heard over the trees as I yelled. I noticed it at that point. A region of unevenly mounded, darker than the rest dirt, suggesting recent excavation. "What is that?" I pointed and asked. Lisa scowled. An animal burrow, most likely. However, as we approached, a strong, bitter odor hit us. Rot, thick, and clearly visible. Tom knelt and pushed a stick into the ground. "This looks weird," he whispered. Something smooth, motionless, and pale emerged when he moved the dirt. I initially believed it to be a root, but then I noticed the shape. Lisa's gasp pierced the quiet. "Is that a hand?" Pale-faced, Tom staggered back. "We to leave right now." However, I was immobile. What my eyes saw was too much for my brain to process. The dull gray skin, the rigid shape of fingers. The surrounding air was oppressive and heavy. "Who could that be?" I muttered. The stories had been told to us. People from neighboring villages had gone missing, but they had always seemed far away, like scary stories told to children. It was real now. Lisa took hold of my arm. "Come on, Alex, then break." Somewhere behind us a branch broke, loud, deliberate. Tom froze. "Have you heard that?" Another drew nearer. On dry leaves, heavy footfall, deliberate like boots, not the swift rush of an animal. "Someone's coming," Lisa muttered. With our hearts racing, we began to retreat from the mound. A person appeared through the trees, a tall, broad man with a shadowed face. He was moving directly in our direction. "Run," I growled. We ran away. Our cheeks and arms were beaten by branches. Suddenly the jungle was alive with sound. The man's heavy steps pursuing us, our terrified breathing, and the beating of our boots. He said, "Hey, stop," in a harsh, irate, and intimate voice. We didn't dare look back. Tom stumbled and yelled when his knee struck a boulder, but Lisa and I caught him and pulled him up. "Keep going," the man shouted. "Stop, kids," from a closer distance. My lungs burned, but the sight of the wood's end and the sunlight ahead gave me just enough willpower to keep going. We stumbled out into the open and stormed into Emily's backyard. With startled eyes, she got up from hiding behind a shed. "What happened?" "There's a body," Tom exclaimed, "and someone's chasing us." We ran the final distance to my house, locking and slamming the door. When my mother saw our faces, she turned away from the kitchen and dropped a dish. "What on earth?" Each of us discussed the hand, the scent, and the man in the woods over one another. She reached for the phone, her hand shaking. "Indeed, officer. Something was discovered by my kid and his pals." "Something horrible," she said. The sirens arrived quickly. As I brought them back, I heard voices on radios, blue lights flashing against the trees, and officers cautiously going down the route. I gestured to the dirt pile. They took their time digging and found what we had already feared: a human body buried shallow, shrouded in sheets. Someone was absent from a town close by. Later that afternoon, the man who had been pursuing us was apprehended while hiding close to the location of the grave. The cops informed us we had done the right thing, he admitted, but I had trouble falling asleep that night. I almost expected to see a shadow watching from the tree-line, but every creak of the house had me sit up and look out the window. Even, now years later, I occasionally consider the possibility that he may have been out there watching and waiting, while we were playing games in the woods, laughing and hiding.